Fog can do strange things in the Alabama pine flats. It can swallow a road you have walked your whole life, turn a familiar tree line into a wall, and make a single lamp look like a distant star that you will never reach. But on the night I first heard the thing that would undo all our certainties, the fog did something worse. It carried a smell that did not belong in any season, not smoke, not rain, not rot, but the raw copper stink of an opened body. And it drew that smell across the cabins, like a slow finger tracing a throat. I remember standing on the porch of the small parsonage near the Blackwater Creek, watching the mist roll low over the cotton stubble, and realizing that the war outside our county was not the only war being fought. Something older had started moving again, and it was hunting in the dark places where men already hunted men. Before we go deeper into this, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if this is your first time here at Tales Never Told, don't forget to subscribe for stories that make history feel like a candle going out in your hand. The year was 1864, and Alabama was a state bruised by hunger and fear. The war had pulled young men away from fields and into graves, and the land itself seemed to lean toward exhaustion. Around the town of Pine Hollow, plantations still clung to the old order, though the old order was cracking. Enslaved people ran more often now, driven by rumors of Union lines pushing south and by the simple knowledge that when a house burns, you do not stay inside it. With every escape, the owners grew more frantic, and the county grew rich on a new trade, men who called themselves trackers, hounds without fur. The most feared of them was a man named Silas Crane. If you lived in Pine Hollow, you heard that name spoken like a prayer and a threat. Silas was not a plantation owner. He was something worse in certain ways because he was an owner of nothing but his skill at catching those who tried to own themselves. He traveled light, rode a bay mare that never tired, and carried a long rifle. He called mercy, though he used it without any mercy you would recognize. I met Silas when he came to St. Bridget Church to speak with Reverend Hiram Cole, the old priest who had baptized half the county and buried the other half. I was newly assigned there, a young minister from Mobile, still naive enough to believe that sermons could soften a hard world. Silas walked into the church on a Sunday afternoon with mud on his boots and blood on his sleeve. He did not take his hat off until he stood in front of the altar. His face was narrow and weathered, the kind of face that looked carved by wind. His eyes were pale, not blue, not gray, but something like creek water in winter. He nodded to Reverend Cole, then to me, as if we were men in a business deal. He said, "Reverend, I need you to pray for my dogs." Cole frowned because he knew what those dogs were used for. He said, "Your dogs are not the ones who need prayer." Silas smiled thinly. He said, "Maybe, but they are the ones who gotta follow the scent." When I asked why he had come, he said without shame that 3 men had run from Harland Plantation west of town. The owner had offered a bounty so high that every tracker in 2 counties had salivated. 2 of those men had been caught within a day. The 3rd was still gone. That 3rd man, Silas said, was not like the others. He did not run in a straight line. He circled. He vanished. He left no tracks in mud that should have held any footprint. Worse, Silas said his dogs refused to follow him after sunset. They would whine and lay flat, noses to the dirt, as if the ground itself had turned against them. Cole looked at him for a long moment. He said, "You are a believer, Silas." Silas shrugged. He said, "I believe in what bites." Cole said, "There are things that bite besides men." Silas leaned closer, lowering his voice. He said, "That is why I am here. Folks say there is a devil in the Blackwater woods. They say the 3rd man is protected by it. They say he made a pact. I don't buy that, but I do buy this. Something out there is killing livestock and leaving bones like they've been gnawed clean by a mouth too big for a wolf. I heard about those killings even before Silas walked into our church. Farmer Hutton had lost 2 calves in a single foggy week. The bodies were found strung up in the lower branches of a cypress, as if some beast had lifted them effortless. Old Mrs. Tewksbury swore she heard a howl that sounded like a man trying to scream through a throat full of nails. People in Pine Hollow told the stories the way they always do with fear, by adding details to make fear feel manageable. They said a wildcat had grown monstrous. They said deserters were raiding stock. They said a Union saboteur had released wolves from a traveling show. Nobody said the word werewolf in daylight. In private, on porches and at mule pens, they did. Silas was the first man to say it to a preacher. He said, "Reverend, I am not superstitious, but I know what I saw 3 nights ago." I asked what he saw. His jaw tightened. He said, "I tracked the 3rd man to the old timber road by Blackwater Creek. Moon was up, fog thick. My dogs had his scent strong. Then we heard a sound ahead like a hog stuck in a trap. I thought maybe he had fallen. I rode forward, and I saw a form crouched over something in the road. It was big and low, shoulders like a bear. I raised Mercy and called out. It turned. Reverend, it had a man's eyes and a wolf's face. It stood on 2 legs like it was learning again how to be upright, and when it opened its mouth, I saw human teeth behind the fangs like it was wearing 2 sets of jaws. Then it ran, not away, toward me. I fired, and I swear to God the bullet hit it in the chest, and it did not even slow. It passed me so close, my mare reared, and when I looked back, I saw it dragging a body into the trees. It was not one of my dogs. It was a man, one of Harland overseers, I think. I felt my spine go cold, yet I tried to hold to reason. I said, "Could it have been a bear with mange?" Silas stared at me like I was a child. He said, "Bears don't look you dead in the face with shame."
Cole made the sign of the cross without meaning to. Then he stopped and straightened, embarrassed. He asked Silas why he had not brought this to the sheriff. Silas spat into the dust near the pew. He said, "Sheriff Baird told me it was bad liquor and nerves. He told me to bring back the 3rd man or stop wasting his time." Silas looked at Cole again. His voice lowered, almost pleading, a sound I did not expect from him. He said, "If there is a devil out there, I want it on a chain. If there is a sickness in a man's blood, I want to know whose blood. 'Cause right now the county thinks one runaway is turning into a story that will make every slave in Alabama brave. And I am not letting that happen." I should have recoiled at his words, but something else pulled at me. Not pity, not agreement. A sense that the world had begun to slip, and that if a thing like this existed, it would not stay hidden behind the fences of Harlan Plantation for long. Cole refused to go with Silas. He was old and tired, and perhaps he knew his own prayers were not meant for the swamp shadows. Silas turned to me instead. He said, "You are young. You got good legs. Come with me. Say your prayers if it makes you feel useful. But keep your eyes open." I wanted to say no. I was meant to keep to scripture, not to hunts. Yet Reverend Cole touched my shoulder gently and said, "Elias, you have a chance to see where faith meets truth. Go careful. If sin is in those woods, it is already there whether you look at it or not." So I went. We rode out that evening with the sun bleeding low behind the pines. Silas brought 2 dogs, lean hounds with scarred ears. He carried Mercy across his saddle and a silver knife on his belt that he said was for any man who needed to be cut loose from his own nightmares. I noticed the knife was not silver. It was pewter, cheap and dull, but he wanted the idea of silver close to his hand. We passed Harlan Plantation at dusk. The big house windows glowed warm, a different world from the quarters where lanterns flickered like fireflies trapped in jars. As we rode by, I saw faces watching us from the shadows between cabins. No one spoke. The air was full of watching. Silas spurred his mare and said, "They know I am coming. They always know."
I asked how he tracked a man who left no tracks. Silas said, "The land speaks if you listen the right way. But this one man, he is not letting the land speak. That means he got help, or he got something in him that changes how the ground remembers." We reached the Blackwater line, just after nightfall. The creek ran black under the moon, tannin dark and slow. The fog was already curling up from the water like breath. The dogs sniffed the air and whined. Silas put a hand on their necks and whispered to them, the way other men whispered to lovers. Then he looked at me and said, "Whatever you see tonight, Reverend, you don't run first. You tell me first," I said. "And if what I see is not natural." He made a small humorless sound. He said, "Nothing about this place is natural anymore." That was the moment the first howl rose from somewhere deep in the timber, long and ragged. Half wolf, half grief. The dogs sank to their bellies. My horse danced sideways. Silas did not move. He only smiled, and in that smile I saw something I had not understood until then. He was not afraid of monsters. He was afraid of losing the place he held in a world built on chains. And he was willing to hunt any legend that threatened it. Even if the legend hunted back, the howl rolled through the trees and then cut off so suddenly, it felt like a blade laid flat across the night. For a moment, even the swamp insects went quiet, as if everything that lived in those woods had learned the same lesson the dogs had, that making noise could get you noticed. Silas slid down from his mare and tied her to a pine root that lifted like a knuckle from the earth. He moved with a calm economy that made my unease feel childish. He took a strip of cloth from his pocket, rubbed it in the moss where a footprint had pressed hours earlier, then let the dogs sniff. They jerked their heads once, twice, then froze. Their bodies were tense, not with eagerness but with refusal. Silas clicked his tongue softly. "No use," he muttered. He lifted his lantern and studied the ground with a practiced gaze. I watched him follow a line only he could see. A bent reed here, a scuff of clay there, and I realized that for years he had been reading the land the way I read men. Every crushed leaf was a sentence to him. Every snapped twig was confession. He moved forward along the old timber road, and I followed, my boots sucking at black mud, my fingers numbing around the rosary I had brought without thinking. The road narrowed into a path, and pine gave way to cypress and sweet gum, roots webbing the earth like ribs of a thin animal. The fog thickened, turning the moon into a blur behind gauze. We walked in that white hush for perhaps half a mile. I say perhaps because distance in fog is a liar. You can walk a minute and feel you've crossed a county. You can walk an hour and feel you've stood still. The only steady thing was Silas, his shoulders squared, mercy hanging low in his right hand, lantern in his left. The second howl came from closer. This time it was not long. It was a short bark of rage, then a wet sound like something heavy moving through underbrush. Silas stopped and raised his palm. I halted behind him. He listened, head slightly tilted. Then he pointed to the left, toward Blackwater Creek, where the fog pooled deepest. We eased that way. The ground dropped into a shallow ravine where the creek had overflowed and retreated. The smell hit me first. The same copper bite I had caught from the parsonage porch, sharper now. Silas lowered his lantern, and we saw what the fog had hidden. A mule lay on its side in the mud, belly opened from throat to flank. The wound was not clean like a knife. It was not ragged like a cougar. It looked peeled, as if hands with patience had pulled the skin aside to reach what was warmest. The mule eyes were gone, not eaten, taken. I had seen death in war reports. I had buried men whose bodies were only half intact after a boiler burst. But this was different. There was a deliberation to it that made my stomach lurch. Silas crouched, touching the mud near the carcass. He held his fingers up to the lantern. There were tracks, not hoof prints, not paw prints. Something like a barefoot man had stepped there, but the toes were too long, and the heel had sunk too deep for a human weight. I whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Silas did not answer. He stood and scanned the trees. Then he did something that surprised me. He took off his hat. He bowed his head over the dead mule for only a breath. Then he put the hat back on. I asked him why. He said, "Ain't no sense letting a beast know I don't fear what it does, but I also don't like seeing a good animal wasted." I didn't know what to say to that. The war had made him hard, but not dead. We pushed on, leaving the mule to the flies that had not yet found it. The dogs would not come close. Their whines faded behind us. Silas said we did not need them now. We followed the ravine until it widened into a stand of old oaks, branches twisted overhead, like the arms of men holding a roof from collapse. Here the fog broke in places, and in those breaks I saw something that made my breath catch. Symbols carved into bark, not fresh, old cuts dark with sap and age, circles with lines through them, crosses bent sideways, a crescent with teeth. The kind of marks you might see on a charm tree in a gullah community on the coast, or on a graveyard gate in a place where superstition is the only medicine. Silas saw them too. He spat. He said, "Hoodoo signs." I said, "You know these." He shrugged. He said, "You hunt long enough, you learn what folks hide behind." I asked who had carved them. He looked at me like that was the wrong question. He said, "Someone who wanted to be kept safe from what walks here, or someone who wanted to keep what walks here safe from us." As he spoke, the lantern light fell on a different mark lower on the oak, hidden near the roots. It was a small handprint in mud, pressed there as if a child had leaned on the tree to steady themselves. The print was fresh. Beside it was a scrape in the bark with a sliver of cloth caught in it, a strip torn from a shirt. The cloth was dark, but a faint pattern of blue thread ran through it. Silas pinched it free and sniffed. He said, "Harland cloth. They issue that to field hands, so he passed through here." My heart raced. I said, "The third man." Silas nodded once, then lifted Mercy and motioned me forward. We moved among the oaks, stepping carefully, and then the ground rose slightly, and we came upon a small clearing I had never seen on any map. In the center stood a cabin, half swallowed by vines. It was old, older than any plantation cabin, maybe a hunter's shack from when these woods were still a frontier. The roof sagged like a tired spine. The door hung ajar. The fog moved in and out of it like breath. Silas whispered, "Stay behind me." We approached. The air around the cabin was colder. That is the only word for it. It felt like a pocket of different season. I couldn't see frost, but my skin prickled. Silas pushed the door with the barrel of Mercy. It creaked open further. Inside was darkness and the scent of dried herbs. He raised the lantern and we stepped in. The cabin was almost bare. A table, a pallet on the floor, a shelf lined with jars. But those jars held things that were not food. I saw teeth, small and large. I saw locks of hair tied with thread. I saw bones, some shaped like chicken, some too long and thin to be from any animal I knew. On the table sat a bowl of ash with something burned into it, the shape of a paw. Not a real paw. The shape someone makes when imagining one. Silas stared at it. He said, "Somebody been working something here." I said, "A conjure worker." He shot me a quick look. He said, "You believe in that?" I said, "I believe people believe." He grunted, which was his way of keeping his mind in one piece. He rummaged through the shelf with blunt hands, then froze. He held up a small leather book. The cover was swollen with damp. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled not with scripture, but with a neat hand, lists and dates and short phrases, some in English, some in a language I did not know. Silas moved the lantern closer. Then he swore softly. He said, "This is mine." I said, "What do you mean?" He flipped to the front. Inside the cover, in his own handwriting, was his name, and under it, a tally of men he had captured over the years. It was a hunter's ledger. He had lost it 3 months earlier on a chase near the river. He had cursed himself for being careless. He had told no one. Yet here it was, on this table, in a cabin deep in Blackwater woods. I felt a chill climb higher than the cold air. I said, "How did it get here?" Silas did not answer. His jaw was tight. He looked around the cabin like a man realizing he had walked into a room where someone had been waiting for him. A sound came from outside, a soft dragging like a heavy sack pulled over leaves. Silas snapped the ledger shut and put it in his coat. He blew out the lantern with 2 sharp breaths. The cabin went black. He pressed a finger to his lips. My heart hammered so hard I feared it would be heard. Through the crack in the door, I saw fog swirling low. Then I saw a shape pass in front of it. Too tall for a deer, too bent for a man. It paused. I heard a sniffing sound. Slow, testing. Then a voice came, low and rough, not a howl, not a growl, but words pushed through a mouth that did not use them often. "Silas Crane," it said. The way it said his name made it sound like something tasted. Silas lifted mercy. He mouthed to me, "When I shoot, run." I shook my head. He didn't have time for argument. The voice outside came again. "You think you hunt in a man. You hunt in your own shadow." Silas kicked the door open and fired into the fog. The shot cracked like lightning. The mare outside screamed and pulled against her tie. Something hit the cabin wall with a thud, heavy enough to shake dust from the rafters. Silas fired again. A wet snarl erupted, then footsteps fast, circling. He stepped out into the clearing, rifle ready, body squared. I followed because fear makes fools of us. The fog was so thick I could barely see the tree line. Silas turned slowly, tracking sound, not sight. Then the fog split as if a body had burst through water. It came at him like a thrown boulder. I only saw pieces in the moon glow. Fur slick with mud, arms too long, a head shaped wrong. Silas fired at point-blank range. The beast slammed into him anyway, driving him backward into the mud. The rifle flew. I stumbled forward without thinking, shouting words from scripture that felt useless in my mouth. The beast reared over Silas. I saw a flash of teeth. I saw its eyes. Silas had been right. They were human eyes, bloodshot, terrified, furious, and in them a sorrow so deep I felt it in my ears like pressure. It hesitated when it saw me. Not much, a heartbeat. But it was enough. Silas pulled his pewter knife and drove it upward into the thing ribs. The blade sank and snapped. The beast howled, a sound that was part pain, part laughter. It leaped away, slamming into the oak line, then vanished into fog like it had never been there. Silas lay on his back gasping. His coat was torn. His shoulder bled. I knelt beside him. He clutched his chest with one hand, not because he was wounded there, but because he could not understand what had happened. He whispered, "It spoke." I said, "Yes." He said, "It knew me." I said, "It said your name." He stared into the fog. Then he laughed once, a broken sound. He said, "That ain't no wolf. That ain't even no man. That's something wearing a man like a memory." We retrieved mercy and staggered out of the clearing. Silas insisted we could not stay there. The cabin was not a refuge. It was bait. We moved back toward the creek, and only after a long silent walk did he speak again. He said, "That third man, he ain't alone. Somebody taught him where to go. Somebody carved them signs. Somebody took my ledger. Whoever been watching me, they been doing it longer than tonight." I asked him who he thought it was. He did not want to say, but he said one name anyway, like spitting out a thorn. He said, "Harland, old cook, Auntie May. Folks say she know woods better than any man. Folks say she talk to things that don't answer nobody else. I had heard of Auntie May. Everyone had. She was an enslaved woman past 60, skin as dark as river silt, hair silver and bound tight under cloth. She had come to Harland plantation as a girl from Savannah, and with her she had carried a reputation for making sickness break and for making cruel men wake to find their mouths full of dirt. The whites called her a witch when they were angry, and a healer when they were desperate. The enslaved called her Mother May, which was a title heavier than any chain. Prayer and fear drifted around her like smoke. I had met her once in church when she came to sit in the colored pews on a Sunday and listen to Reverend Cole preach about Moses. She had looked at me afterward with eyes that saw too much and said, "Son, you preach freedom in a place built for cages. Be careful what you wake up." I remembered that now, and my mouth went dry. When we returned to the plantation edge near dawn, the sky was still iron gray. Silas said he needed rest and a new plan, but his mind was already chewing. I went straight to St. Bridget, half to tell Cole what we had seen, half to prove to myself I was not dreaming. Cole listened without interruption, face growing tighter with each detail. When I mentioned the cabin, the jars, the symbols, he sat back as if struck. He said, "That cabin was once a prayer house. Before the Harlands built their big house, before the county line was drawn, a group of escaped people lived in those woods. They built that shack and used it for worship in secret. My predecessor, Father O'Malley, tried to bring them into the church. Some came, some did not. They had their own ways. Then one winter the Harlands hired men to clear more land. They found that camp. There was violence. The survivors vanished deeper into black water. People said the woods took them. I said, so the cabin is old refuge." Cole nodded slowly. He said, "Old refuge can become old altar. Depends who enters and what they bring." I asked him about Auntie May. Cole rubbed his forehead. He said, "May knows things. Her mother was a root worker on the coast, and her mother's mother before that. She has saved white children from fever. She has delivered black children when no doctor would come. She has also buried children in the night when the master sold their mothers away. She carries a ledger of grief this county does not want to see. If a werewolf walks these woods, Elias, it might be because sorrow learned to wear teeth." His words made me shiver, but they did not answer the question of what we had fought. We needed more than theology. We needed truth. That afternoon I went to Harlan Plantation under a pretense of visiting the quarters to prepare souls for Sunday. In truth, I was looking for Auntie May. I found her behind the big house in the kitchen garden, stooped, hands in the soil. The sun made her skin shine like polished wood. She did not look up when I approached. She said, "I heard you went in them woods with Crane." I froze. I said, "How did you know?" She plucked a weed and crushed it between her fingers. She said, "Wind tells stories. Dogs tell stories. Men tell stories. Sometimes them stories come to me, before the men do." I couldn't tell if she was teasing or warning. I said, "We saw something." She finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp and calm. She said, "You saw what been hunting this place a long time." I said, "A beast." She shook her head. She said, "A man, child, a man with a curse on him and a curse in him." I asked who. She stared at me a moment, weighing what I deserved to know. Then she said, "His name is Jonah, Jonah Carter. He was born on Harlan land. His mama was sold when he was 10. His daddy was whipped to death same month. Jonah never cried. He just watched. I watched too." She leaned closer. She said, "When you watch cruelty long enough, it watch you back." I said, "Is he the third runaway?" She said, "He ran 2 nights ago, but he been running inside himself since he was a boy." I told her Silas believed she protected him. Her mouth twitched with something like pity. She said, "I didn't make that choice for him, but I didn't stop it either." I asked what she meant. She straightened slowly, bones popping under her cloth. She motioned for me to follow her behind the kitchen shed, where no overseer could hear. There she pointed to the tree line that rose toward Blackwater. She said, "You know why folks fear them woods." I said, "They say the devil lives there." She nodded. She said, "The devil got many cabins, but that place used to be a sanctuary for ones who escaped chains. They prayed to God and to spirits of the land all at once, because when you're starving, you don't get to be picky about who you ask for help." Years ago, Harlan people hunted that camp, killed near everybody. The ones who lived put a vow on them woods. They said no master or catcher would cross that line again without paying a price. They asked the old spirits to guard it. Spirits don't forget. They don't do half measures either. She looked at my face and must have seen my doubt. She said, "You think that is foolish, but you saw the marks, you smelled the blood, you saw a thing walk on two legs and howl like grief. That is the price." I wanted to argue. Yet the memory of those eyes stopped me. I said, "Did Jonah make a pact?" She said, "He didn't go looking for one. He went running for his life and stumbled into a place that already hungered for revenge. And when a wounded heart meets a hungry spirit, something new gets born." I said, "So he becomes beast at night." She said, "Night, daytime, whenever the blood gets hot." She paused. She said, "All this started after Silas Crane caught Jonah 2 years ago, brought him back in chains. Silas bragged about that catch, called Jonah the one that got away twice. Jonah got whipped near to death for it. They hung him by the wrists over a smoke fire. He lived, but when he came down, he wasn't all the way human no more, not inside." A month later, hogs started dying in Blackwater, then men. She gripped the handle of her hoe, so hard her knuckles lifted pale. She said, "Spirits chose him, or maybe he chose spirits. Either way, he is the knife the woods been sharpening to cut the old order." I swallowed. I said, "So we should leave him." She studied me. She said, "What you think?" I said, "If he is killing men." She cut me off. She said, "Men been killing him his whole life. You talking about justice. You better ask who taught him that word." I could not answer. She stepped closer. She said, "Listen, I ain't saying blood is righteous. I ain't saying beast is holy. I am saying you cannot stop a fire by pretending it ain't burning. If Crane keeps hunting Jonah, Jonah will hunt him back. And Jonah will not stop at Crane. He will kill any white man he smells fear on. He will kill any black man who tries to hold him. This is bigger than one runaway, bigger than one catcher. It's the whole county trying to keep the past nailed down while it grows teeth." I left Harland with her words clinging to me. By evening, the whole county was buzzing. Another body had been found near the creek, a young patrolman named Reddick, throat torn open, rifle still in his hands. The sheriff called a meeting at the courthouse. Planters, patrolmen, preachers, anyone with a gun came. Silas stood there, arm bandaged, telling his version of last night's fight. He did not mention the cabin or the ledger. He did mention the beast, and every man in that room leaned closer like children around a campfire. Some laughed in disbelief. Some crossed themselves. Sheriff Baird slammed his fist on the table and said, "The war already got us nervous. We ain't letting swamp tales make us weak. But if a wild animal is out there, we will put it down. If a runaway is hiding behind a mask, we will hang him." Silas said, "I will lead the hunt. I know where it lairs. I will bring proof." He looked at me when he said it, as if daring me to contradict him. I kept my mouth shut. Cole was not there. He had taken sick that morning, feverish and shaking, perhaps from age, perhaps from fear. All I could do was watch those men sharpen their certainty into violence. That night, Silas came to the parsonage. His face was harder than before. He said, "We ride at dawn. 20 men, dogs, traps. We will circle Blackwater and smoke it out." I said, "Silas, if what we saw is a man." He snapped. "If it was a man, it would have died when I shot it," I said. Auntie May says his name is Jonah Carter. Silas stared at me. The torchlight caught a flicker in his eyes. Anger first, then recognition. He said, "You talked to that old witch." I said, "I talked to a woman who knows this land." He stepped closer, voice low. He said, "She fill your head with slave prayers. Don't let pity make you stupid, preacher. That thing killed a patrolman today. It killed my mule yesterday. It nearly killed me. You want to say that as a victim? Fine. I say a rabid dog is a victim too, right up until it bites your child," I said. "If you drive him deeper, he will kill more." Silas barked a laugh. He said, "If he lives, he will kill more. Either way, blood is coming. I'd rather it be on my terms." He left before I could answer. I spent the night in prayer I did not feel. Dawn came heavy and gray. The hunt assembled at the edge of Blackwater. Men on horses, men on foot. Dogs straining at leashes. Muskets and rifles gleaming damp. Silas moved among them like a commander. He gave orders, split them into lines, told them to keep gaps tight. They thanked him for leading. They called him brave. None of them saw what I saw on his face. A hunger as sharp as theirs, the kind that pretends to be duty. We pushed into the woods. The fog was thinner now, but the air still felt wrong. The dogs picked up scent quickly, barking, pulling men forward. We followed a trail along the creek, then into the oak stand. The dogs hesitated at the same line Silas had pointed out last night. They whined, tails tucked. Silas shouted and whipped them. The dogs yelped and lunged anyway. Fear pushed into obedience. I felt something twist in me. Auntie May had said, "Spirits do not do half measures." I began to believe her. As we neared the clearing, a wind picked up without warning. It moved through the trees in a sound like many mouths whispering at once. The fog swirled around our legs. Horses snorted. A younger hunter dropped his rifle because his hands shook. Silas raised his arm for silence. Then a scream came from behind us. One of the men in the rear line had been dragged into the brush. We heard his shouting, then a crunching sound that ended it. The dogs went mad, barking toward the sound. Men fired at shadows. The forest swallowed each shot. Silas shouted for order, but order had already fled. Another scream, this time to our right. A horse reared, rider thrown. I saw a flash of fur in the undergrowth, then nothing. Panic spread like oil on water. Men ran toward the screams, leaving gaps. Silas cursed and tried to pull them back. He looked at me, eyes wide. He said, "It is playin' with us." I said, "It is hurtin' you." He did not understand. Then the howl rose again, not from one direction but many, echoing off timber until it sounded like the woods themselves were howling. The men froze. In that stillness, a figure stepped into the clearing. Not the beast. A man. Barefoot, chest heaving, shoulders squared. He was lean, tall, skin dark, hair matted. His wrists carried old scars of rope burn. His eyes were fixed on Silas. He said, "You brought a posse to kill a ghost." Silas raised mercy. He said, "Jonah." So he knew the name. Jonah smiled, and it was a smile emptied of warmth. He said, "You remember me." Silas said, "I remember the bounty you cost me when you ran." Jonah said, "I remember the whip you brought back with you. I remember the smoke. I remember you laughing while I coughed my lungs out." His voice was human, but there was a roughness to it like gravel in a riverbed. Silas said, "You killed Reddick." Jonah said, "I did." Silas said, "You killed livestock." Jonah said, "I did." Silas said, "You killed 2 men on patrol last month." Jonah tilted his head. He said, "That was not me. That was the woods." Silas laughed. Jonah looked past him at the men. He said, "You all want to know what hunts you at night. Look at him." He pointed at Silas. He said, "He taught me what huntin' means." A murmur ran through the line. A planter snapped, "Shut him up." Jonah kept talking. He said, I ran because I wanted to live. You chased because you love to take life from folks who ain't allowed to keep it. Last night you shot me and I didn't die. That scared you. It should, 'cause now I am done running." Silas lifted Mercy higher. He said, "Step closer and I will put you down like any other animal." Jonah breathed in slow. His nostrils flared and I saw something shift in his posture, a coiling. He said, "You already tried." Then he threw his head back and screamed. The scream tore through me. It was not a howl. It was not human. It was both stacked on each other like two songs sung at once. His bones seemed to ripple under skin. His shoulders widened, his arms lengthened, hair erupted along his spine and down his forearms. The men shouted and stumbled back. I could not move. I watched the transformation the way you watch a storm roll in too fast to escape. In breaths, the man became the thing we had seen, tall and hunched, muzzle pushing out from human face, eyes still human, still furious, now floating in fur like lanterns behind bars. Silas fired. The shot hit Jonah dead center. The beast staggered half a step, then charged. It slammed into Silas hard enough to launch him backward. Mercy flew from his hands. The beast landed over him, claws sinking into his coat. Men fired wildly. Bullets thudded into trees. One struck a hunter in the leg. Another hit a dog. The beast snapped its head toward the noise, teeth flashing, and in that moment I saw it very clearly. It was not mindless. It chose. It decided. It had a purpose. It turned back to Silas, lowered its muzzle to his face. Silas struggled under it, hands scrabbling for the broken pewter knife at his belt. Jonah spoke through the muzzle, words bubbling from a throat that was not built for them. "You wrote my name in your book. You counted me. You sold me back to hell. Now I count you." Silas gasped, pushed a hand against the beast's chest. He croaked, "You ain't a man no more." Jonah said, "Neither are you." Then it lifted its head and howled again, and the sound triggered something in the woods. The wind surged. The fog thickened so fast it was like milk poured into the clearing. Men began to shout that they could not see. Horses bolted. Someone fired a shot that hit the air above my head and made my ears ring. Through the fog, I saw Silas make a desperate move. He grabbed a fallen rifle, aimed into the beast's side, and fired. The beast recoiled, snarling. It did not die, but it staggered away, bleeding dark. It vanished into the fog. Silas rolled onto his knees and crawled for mercy. He was shaking. He had never trembled in any story I heard. He trembled now. The clearing was chaos. Men dragged wounded friends. Dogs yelped. The wind died as suddenly as it had come, leaving fog hanging heavy and still. I heard a voice in that fog, not Jonah, not Silas. A woman's voice, old and calm, as if spoken right behind my ear. It said, "Enough." The fog parted just enough for me to see Auntie May stepping into the clearing. She walked without fear, hands empty, back straight. Men raised their rifles at her. She did not flinch. She looked at them like a schoolteacher looks at children who have made a mess they do not know how to clean. She said, "Put them guns down. You shoot in these woods and you shoot your own souls." Sheriff Baird, who had come with the hunt, snarled, "Woman, get out of here! This is not your business." She turned to him. Her voice was quiet, but every man heard it. She said, "This been my business since before you was born, boy. You all came here to kill what you made. You think you can put it back in the ground with lead. You cannot." Murmurs again, some angry, some frightened. Silas staggered up, blood on his mouth. He said, "She helped him. She made him." Auntie May looked at Silas with pity so sharp it almost felt like contempt. She said, "You made him when you put a rope round his wrists and called it law. I did not teach him to hate. I only tried to teach him to live." Silas said, "He is a killer now." She nodded. She said, "Yes." "So are you." The sheriff raised a pistol and shoved it toward her. He said, "You are under arrest for witchcraft and sedition." She smiled without joy. She said, "Arrest me then, but you better arrest the woods too." A sound came from the tree line. Not a howl, a whimper. Jonah stumbled out in human form, naked from waist up, blood running down his ribs. His eyes were glazed with pain. He leaned against an oak. Auntie May moved toward him slowly. Silas screamed and fired at Jonah. The shot hit the tree instead, splintering bark. Jonah flinched, then growled low, the shift beginning again. Auntie May lifted a hand to him. She said, "Jonah, no, not now. Come to me." He shook, breathing hard, his jaw clenched. The hair that had started to sprout along his spine receded. He stayed a man. He looked at Silas and said, "You see, I can choose. I choose not to kill you when I could. You ain't never chose that for me." Silas fired again. This time the bullet hit Jonah in the shoulder. He fell to a knee. Men shouted. Some moved to stop Silas. Others cheered him on. Auntie May stepped between Silas and Jonah. She spread her arms wide. She said, "You want him, you go through me." Silas staggered, rage and fear contorting his face. He said, "Move!" She didn't. He lifted mercy at her chest. My mind screamed for me to act, but my body was lead. Jonah shouted, "May, get down!" She did not. She only looked at Silas and said, "Do it. Show everybody who the real beast is." Silas hesitated. In that hesitation, I saw the man he might have been in some other life. Then his eyes hardened, his finger tightened, the rifle cracked. Auntie May jolted backward as if punched by the earth. She fell in the mud beside Jonah. For a second, nobody moved. The silence after the shot was worse than the shot. Jonah let out a sound like a child. He crawled to her, lifting her head. Blood soaked her dress. She breathed once, twice, shallow. She looked up at him and then at me. Her lips moved. I leaned close. She whispered, "Don't let the story be theirs." Then her eyes went still. Something inside Jonah tore loose. He threw his head back and howled, a sound that fractured the air. His body shifted in an explosion of rage. Fur burst. Bones snapped and reformed. He rose, towering over Silas. Men stepped back, terrified. Silas tried to reload Mercy with shaking hands. He fumbled the powder. Jonah crossed the clearing in 2 strides and slammed him to the ground. I heard Silas' ribs crack. Silas screamed and begged and cursed all at once. Jonah lowered his muzzle to Silas' ear. He spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "You wanted proof. Here is your proof." Then he bit. Not the throat, the shoulder. He clamped down hard, teeth sinking deep, holding there. Silas shrieked. Jonah held on for a long time, as if pouring something into him. Then he released. He stood back, chest heaving, eyes wild. He looked at the men. He said, "You go home now. You tell them what you saw. You tell them the woods got a guard and it ain't yours to command." He turned and vanished into the trees, leaving fog swirling in his wake. No one followed. No one could. Silas lay in the mud moaning, clutching his shoulder where blood bubbled from punctures too clean to be a bullet. The sheriff knelt by him. He said, "We gotta get you to town." Silas grabbed his arm. He whispered, "Don't let 'em see me like this." The sheriff said, "You are alive." Silas said, "Not for long." He meant it in a way I did not understand yet. They carried Auntie May's body out on a door they tore from the cabin. They carried Silas on a makeshift litter. The men left those woods in a staggered line, silent, ashamed, confused. I walked behind them, numb. When we reached the courthouse, the town had gathered, women with hands over mouths, children peering between skirts, planters stiff with fury. The sheriff shouted that an animal attack had killed May and wounded Silas. He said anyone spreading superstition would be jailed. Silas was taken to Dr. Pruitt, who cleaned the wound and muttered about infection. By nightfall, the swelling had already turned dark. Silas raved with fever. He kept saying, "He put something in me. He marked me." Dr. Pruitt told the sheriff it was delirium. I knew it was not. The bite was not meant to kill. It was meant to change. The next 3 nights were quiet in the woods. Too quiet. No livestock died. No men disappeared. People tried to convince themselves the nightmare had ended with May death. They buried her fast in the colored cemetery under a rain that felt like morning. Reverend Cole was too weak to perform the rites, so I did, voice shaking, trying to speak of hope to people whose hope had been shot in the chest. At the grave, an old woman began a low song in a language I did not know. Others joined. The melody rose like smoke. It felt older than the church, older than Harland land. I understood then what May meant. The story could belong to the ones who suffered, or to the ones who enforced suffering. Whoever held it would shape what came next. On the 4th night, Silas vanished from Dr. Pruitt's house. The window was open. The bed was empty. There were bloody footprints on the floor leading toward Blackwater. Sheriff Baird cursed and called out another posse. Few men volunteered. Those who did kept their rifles close, but their eyes closer to the dark. I went to St. Bridget and found Reverend Cole, sitting up for the first time in days. His face was drawn. He said, "Auntie May is dead." I nodded. He closed his eyes. He said, "God forgive us." I said, "Silas has been bitten." Cole opened his eyes sharply. He said, "Bitten by Jonah." I said, "Yes." Cole exhaled slowly. He said, "Then Jonah did what May could not bring herself to do. He made Silas carry the curse too." He paused. He said, "In old stories, a curse shared becomes a mirror. The hunter becomes hunted by his own shape." I asked Cole what to do. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "You already know what to do, Elias. You must go into those woods again, not to hunt, to witness, and to decide which story you will tell when you come back." Before dawn, I rode alone toward Blackwater. Not because I was brave, because I was terrified of staying in town and pretending I had not seen what I had seen. The forest was damp and still. The fog was thinner, but the ground seemed to drink light. I found Silas, tracks quickly. The barefoot prints ran in a zigzag, with long toes pressing deep, like the ones we had seen by the mule. I followed them to the clearing. The cabin stood quiet. Auntie May blood had darkened the mud. In the center of the clearing there was a new mark carved into the oak, fresh, deep, a circle with a line through it. Under it, a shape like a claw. I heard breathing behind me. I turned. Jonah stood at the tree line in human form, shirt torn, eyes haunted. He said, "You come alone." I said, "Yes." He studied my face like he was reading a page he did not trust. He said, "You preach God. You still preach him after what you saw." I said, "God is here whether I preach or not." He glanced at the cabin. He said, "May told you about this place." I said, "She did." His jaw clenched. He said, "She dead cause of me too." I said, "She chose to stand between you and a bullet." Jonah shook his head hard. He said, "She thought she could make a new world by giving her body to it. But this world only takes." I said, "She told me not to let the story be theirs." He stared. He said, "Then tell it right." I asked what right meant. He stepped closer. He said, "Right means you don't say a beast came from nowhere. You say a beast was built. You say men like Silas made a law that wore teeth first. You say May tried to keep me human. I tried to keep me human. Then you say she got killed by the same hand that had killed us in every other way." I swallowed. I said, "What about Silas?" Something flickered across his face, a grim satisfaction twisted with dread. He said, "He will come. When the moon gets heavy, he will come here, and he will learn what he been doing to others." I said, "He will kill." Jonah nodded. He said, "Maybe." Maybe he will choose like I learned to choose. Or maybe he will let the curse run him. Either way, he gonna feel what it means to live with a monster in your ribs. I wanted to plead for mercy, but the word felt rotten on my tongue. I said, "If he becomes like you, what then?" Jonah looked past me into the woods as if listening to something far away. He said, "Then the county got two devils now, but maybe two devils fight each other instead of hunting the weak." He turned to go, then stopped. He said, "Elias, you believe a man can change." I said, "I believe God can change a man." Jonah stared at me. He said, "God ain't here in the way you think, but maybe he in what May did, maybe he in what you do next." Then he vanished into the trees like a shadow, deciding it was done with daylight. I waited in the clearing until night. I do not know why, except that my feet would not carry me away. The moon rose full and white, a coin pressed against the sky. The fog crept back. I heard movement deeper in the woods. Not Jonah. Another set of steps, uneven, stumbling. Then a howl rose that made my hair lift. It was not Jonah Howl. It was raw, confused, a man trying to speak in a language his throat had never known. Silas Crane stumbled into the clearing, shirt gone, skin pale with sweat, eyes wild. His shoulder wound was black around the bite marks. He looked at his hands as if they were strangers. He saw me and froze. He whispered, "Reverend." I said, "Silas." He staggered closer, breathing hard. He said, "It burns like a coal in my bones. I see things, I smell things, I hear every heart in them woods." I said nothing. He grabbed my coat. He said, "He did this. He cursed me." I said, "You chased him into a vow older than your county. You pulled pain out of the world like weeds and threw it on a fire. Fires spread." Silas stared at me like I had slapped him. He said, "You talk like her. Like that witch." I said, "Her name was May. She died because you could not accept what you had made." His lips trembled. Then he pushed me away and back toward the center of the clearing. His body began to shake. He clutched his chest. He groaned. The change took him like a seizure. His spine arched. His jaw lengthened. He screamed. The scream broke into a howl. In moments, he was the thing Jonah was, but different in a way I cannot explain. Jonah transformation carried sorrow. Silas carried hunger. His muzzle was thicker. His eyes were not mournful. They were furious at the world for daring to touch him back. He sniffed the air, head twitching, then fixed on me. I did not move. I could not. He took a step toward me, claws sinking into mud. Then, another figure strode from the fog. Jonah, already shifting, body growing, fur rising, eyes blazing. The two beasts faced each other across the clearing, and in that moment, I understood the vow of the woods. It was not to keep them safe. It was to make their violence turn inward until it could not spill outward anymore. They circled, low, snarling. Silas lunged first. Jonah met him with a slam that shook the cabin. They tore at each other with teeth and claws. The sound was like logs splitting. I backed to the oak line, helpless witness to a battle that was older than either of them. Silas fought like a man who had always attacked the weaker and now could not accept an equal. Jonah fought like a man who had learned that restraint is a kind of power. He let Silas rush, then dodged, drove him into trees, bit deep into his flank, not to infect now but to end. Silas howled and swung wild. Jonah clamped on his throat. For a second I thought he would kill him. He did not. He held, eyes locked with Silas' eyes, as if forcing him to see something. Then Jonah released. Silas staggered, blood pouring, and the change began to reverse in him. Bones shrinking, fur receding. He fell as a man into the mud, choking. Jonah stepped back, also shifting down into human form, shaking with exhaustion. He stood over Silas. Silas coughed blood and whispered, "Finish it." Jonah looked at him a long time. Then he said, "No, you live with it. You live with what you are now and what you were." He bent and grabbed Silas' rifle Mercy from where it had fallen earlier, still loaded from some desperate hand. He placed it in Silas' hands. He said, "If you want to die, you choose it, like I learned to choose." Silas sobbed. I had never seen him cry. It was not a noble sound. It was the sound of a soul cracking under the weight of its own deeds. Jonah turned away. He looked at me. His voice was rough but human. He said, "Take him out. Don't let them men in town kill him and call it justice. He earned his torment. He don't earn their lie." I nodded, stunned. Jonah walked into the fog and did not look back. I knelt beside Silas. He was half-conscious, bleeding, shivering in the cold air. With effort, I got him onto my horse and led us out of Blackwater before dawn. When we reached town, the sheriff and a few men met us with guns. They demanded to know where Jonah was. I said, "Gone deeper than you can follow." They wanted to see Silas. I kept them back. I said, "He is sick. He needs a doctor, not a mob." The sheriff tried to push past me. Reverend Cole appeared then at the church door, wrapped in a blanket, leaning on a cane. He said, "Sheriff, if you want a death tonight, you will have to start with me." The sheriff hesitated. Even in a world that worshipped power, a dying priest carried weight. They retreated, muttering. Silas was taken into St. Bridget's cellar. Dr. Pruitt came and cleaned his wounds. He said Silas would not die from the bites. Something in him was healing too fast. That frightened the doctor, more than any infection. Over the next weeks, Silas changed in ways no one could see at first. He avoided moonlight. He stayed locked in the cellar on nights when his skin crawled and his teeth ached. Sometimes we heard low growls from below the floorboards. Sometimes we heard him praying in a broken whisper, not to be spared, but to be contained. Reverend Cole made me swear to keep him hidden. He said, the county would lynch him and call it cleansing. They would never admit what really happened. They would rather kill the mirror than face what it reflects. Jonah never returned to town. Some said he fled north. Some said he died in the swamp. I do not believe either. There were nights after that when livestock was found dead at the edge of Blackwater, but the bodies were not mangled. They were left whole, as if a warning rather than a feast. No white man stepped into those woods again without trembling. Enslaved people began to slip away more often. They used Blackwater as a corridor, a place the patrols would not cross. Some left offerings at the tree line, bits of bread, a ribbon, a song. They called the woods a sanctuary again. The planters called it cursed. Both were right. In late summer, Reverend Cole died. Before he went, he asked me to promise something. He said, "Elias, tell the story true when my voice is gone. Don't let the sheriff write it into a neat report about a mad dog. Don't let the planters turn it into a warning tale to keep their slaves scared. Let it be what it is. A reckoning," I promised him. After Cole's funeral, the sheriff came to me with a paper to sign, a statement that St. Bridget had no knowledge of a runaway named Jonah Carter, and that disturbances in Blackwater had been the work of a wild animal, now driven off by brave men. I looked at the paper, then at his face. I said, "I will not sign a lie." He stared hard. He said, "You will if you want to keep preachin' in this county." I said, "Then maybe this county does not deserve preachin'." He left in anger. I expected retaliation. It never came. The war ended not long after, and with it the old order collapsed so loudly that even Pine Hollow could not pretend it did not hear. Freedom came like dawn, uneven and full of shadows. But it came. Harland Plantation was abandoned within a year. The big house windows went dark. The quarters emptied as people moved toward towns and family and futures they had only whispered about. Auntie May grave became a place people visited on their way out, leaving flowers, leaving prayers, leaving thanks. Years later, when I left Pine Hollow for good, I rode past that grave. I saw new names carved beside hers, free names chosen by free mouths. I thought of Jonah. I never saw him again. But sometimes in other states, other parishes, I would hear a story drift in on the wind. A tale of a shadow in the trees that guided runaways through swamps. A tale of a beast that tore apart a posse and then vanished. A tale of a man with wolf eyes who never harmed the innocent and never forgave the cruel. People called it a legend. I called it memory walking on four legs. As for Silas, he lived. We kept him hidden through the first year after the war. On nights when the moon drew him like a hook, he would lock himself in the old vestry with chains around his waist, begging God to make him smaller. Sometimes I would sit outside the door and listen to his lungs fight with a throat that wanted to howl. He never once asked to be forgiven. He only asked to be stopped. One winter night he came upstairs pale and calm and handed me mercy. He said, "I can't keep this anymore." The gun had been his identity. Giving it up was like cutting off a limb. He asked me to take him to Blackwater. I resisted. He said, "I ain't going to hunt. I'm going to leave what I was where it belongs." We rode to the tree line at dusk. He walked into the fog alone. I waited by the road. I heard a howl deep in the woods, then another answering it. Not hostile, not friendly, but understanding. Silas never returned. In the morning I found his coat folded on a stump, mercy bullets laid beside it, and a carved mark on the oak. A simple cross upright, not bent, not twisted. I do not know if Jonah met him inside. I do not know if Silas died or lived some new life among the trees. I only know the woods took him the way the woods had taken so many. Not as a punishment alone, but as a kind of end to the counting. People in Pine Hollow eventually tried to bury the whole thing under other stories. They said a wild pack had roamed through in wartime. They said Silas had died of fever. They said Auntie May was a martyr who had tried to stop a beast. They said the church had handled it all like proper Christians. Those versions are tidy. They are safe. They are false. The truth is harder. A man hunted other men for profit and pride. A boy grew into a man under cruelty so constant it reshaped his soul. A vow, laid by the oppressed, called up something fierce to guard a sanctuary. A healer tried to hold that fierceness in check and died doing it. A curse moved from victim to oppressor, not to make the world fair, but to make the oppressor finally feel the weight of what he had done. And in that collision of brutality and spirit, the woods became a judge when courts would not. If there is a lesson in it, it is not that monsters lurk in fog. It is that when you build a world on cages, the shadows around those cages eventually learn your voice, your scent, your name, and they come calling. The night fog still rises over Blackwater Creek. The oaks still wear carved marks that no axe has ever erased. And sometimes, if the wind is right, you can hear a howl that does not sound like a beast celebrating blood. It sounds like grief refusing to be silent ever again.